Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Cedarville Stories podcast. I'm Mark Weinstein, and we're off to a great start in 2025. And I'm confident you'll enjoy today's program with Pastor Nick Boucher. Nick earned his bachelor's degree in mass communication from Wright State University before earning a Master of Ministry degree and a Master of Divinity degree from Cedarville University. Nick is originally from North Carolina, which explains why he's a fan of the pro and college sports teams in the Tar Heel State. He and his wife, Emily, are parents of two sons, Xavier and Theodore, and today Nick serves as a youth pastor at Patterson Park Church in Beavercreek, Ohio. Let's go to my conversation with Nick Boucher in today's Cedarville Stories podcast. So Nick, your dad told me that you are still clinging to your childhood sports teams, the college and pro teams in North Carolina. So my question is, isn't it time for you to follow teams where you live, like the national champions in the Big Ten, or perhaps the Detroit Lions, even your dad's beloved Boston Celtics?
I've been through the ringer with having to live under the shadow of Patriots, Celtics, Red Sox, Bruins my whole life. I feel like...
Embrace it.
I don't feel like I need to. I'm showing loyalty. I'm showing that I'm not bandwagon. I was born in Chapel Hill. So Tar Heels are my saving grace in the sports world.
Oh, in basketball.
Yeah, in basketball. Okay. And then, the Panthers have had moments, very short few moments. And then Hornets. If I could, I would, but it's too deep in me.
You're a loyal person.
I think it proves to everyone that I know. Yeah. I will stick even through the worst of the worst. So
yeah, I understand. It's tough for me at times to live in Ohio, given my roots up north.
And I have no Buckeye in me whatsoever.
Thank you.
Anything but Duke, anything but the Buckeyes.
Anything but Duke. So from knowing you a little, I've known you a lot of your life.
Yeah.
I know that you have a love for scripture. I do. You have a love for worship, discipleship, and people in general. And we're going to talk about all these later on the podcast. But before we get there, I'm interested in knowing, what's it like for you to serve on the same pastoral staff as your dad? Because that's unique. Yeah. It could be confusing.
Yeah.
Guys with the same last name. What's it like really to serve with your dad on a daily basis?
Yeah. I've talked to my wife, Emily, about this quite a bit. It's actually one of the biggest joys that I get right now. To see, obviously, growing up in my dad's home, children's pastor. I was actually in his children's ministry when we were in North Carolina. So I've seen him as a pastor. To see him not on the same level because he's much wiser and more caring, and just genuinely, as far as a pastoral heart, I learn pretty much every day from my dad in that. But to see how he executes things and how he cares for people in the church, how prayerful he is, how wise he is. I mean, it's like you kind of get closer to the fire of ministry with him. Yeah. And at the same time, you're also seeing him excel in things that you'd never even thought of what goes on behind the scenes. So in a lot of ways, I feel like it's actually kind of like I'm learning even more from my dad than I ever have because I'm watching him actually do the very thing that's natural to him.
So let's break that down a little bit. So what are some practical things that he has taught you since you joined the staff at Patterson Park Church?
Yeah. So contentment is one. I wouldn't say that's like my strongest gift. My dad is extremely caring of people, but also just content to learn about people in front of him, willing to engage them where they're at. And I think I'm more idealistic often, and that can get frustrating at times. And so my dad is willing to kind of let the moment pass of where the heated emotions get, where I can oftentimes enter, and just to say, hey, we're going to let the Lord we're going to trust the Lord in it. And just watching him in that is a representation of just like super faithfulness. Yeah. And I just appreciate an example, and to know that's also my father. Like now that I've become a dad, I'm like, man, I want to imitate that for my kids and the home. And he did that, but now to be on the same staff is just like another level. So,
yeah. And as a side note, I know this is a podcast about your life and your ministry, but as a side note, I don't think there's anyone that I've seen at Patterson Park. This is no criticism of anyone. Just how great your dad leads in the baptismal services. He's just amazing.
Oh, but yeah.
It's real.
Oh, yeah. I think that comes from his background a little bit, just his history. I mean, he came from a different denomination as a kid, and he grew up in a different church denomination and stuff. But I think because of that, the gospel, the clarity of the gospel is so needed for him, even with his own relationships outside of like family and friends. Like he has just a love for the Lord and the gospel. And so he wants to be super clear in that. And so watching him do that in a baptism, I think it's like one of the moments he shines. He also does it at VBSs and things like that. When he ever articulates the gospel, it's kind of like the moment the whole room stops and just wants to be like, wow, this is what the gospel is. And it's so clear. And
he is very clear at sharing the gospel in baptisms, no question. So last question, speaking about your dad.
Yeah.
So I know him as Boo or Pastor Boo, okay? I never call him by his given name of David. Never. Hardly ever, at least. So we have two Bouchers on staff at Patterson Park. What do people call you? Do they call you Pastor Nick? Or I've heard names like Baby Boo. I've even heard Boo Boo. How do you like to be identified?
Yeah, I go Pastor Nick. Boo Boo has been a part of my life before when I worked other places, Chick-fil-A and things like that. So put Boo Boo in the past. I'm not Pastor Boo 2. I could never live up to that, first of all. My dad got his name from also being someone that likes to like scare people, like just sneak around corners and things. So Pastor Boo kind of stems from that, and short for Boucher. Sometimes I can't even call my dad by like a name Dad because he won't respond to Dad because he's a pastor of so many families. So all the kids that would yell Dad. So when I grew up in his children's ministry, I actually would have to call him Pastor Boo or Boo to get his attention because he wouldn't respond to Dad because he just thought it was some other kid yelling at their dad.
Is that still the case? Working? I
still got to work on, It takes me a second. Sometimes I just, I call him Boo, and people in the office will be like, why do you call your dad Boo all the time? Kinda, yeah. My mom, same thing, kind of J Boo. It just kind of,
really?
It's respectful. I'm trying to be.
It sure is.
Yeah. And I love them both. Yeah.
So I mentioned in the introduction that you married Emily Weindorf, and the way you proposed to Emily is a fascinating story in and of itself. And I want to go there. So take us back to when first you knew when you were going to propose to Emily, and set the stage as briefly as you can and tell that story because it's a great story.
It is a good story. So I met Emily summer of 2019. We started dating pretty much that same summer.
Was that right after VBS?
No, we had met at VBSs before that. That was actually a friend group got together for a worship night, and I brought a cajon because she asked me, and she knew I had a cajon, and because of that, I showed up. We started talking, and then 3 weeks later, we were kind of like hanging out, talking, dating.
Okay.
About 7-8 months later, I had known her, and our friend group had kind of been similar, so I had known her pretty well. But about 8 months later, she was heading off to Peru she's a PA, so she was doing a PA rotation in Peru. And I had planned when she got back somehow to propose. And I was like, well, maybe this, like I could give her a gift that could lead into a proposal.
Right.
So as I was creating this gift, it kind of just started to morph into something else. I always loved puzzles, escape rooms. I used to do that for like people in ministry and even in Lawlor. Like I would create things like that and have guys go through it. And so with Emily, it was like, well, you're going on a plane, can't give you like an escape room.
No.
So I gave her like puzzles. I created videos that had like clues on it.
While she's in Peru.
While she's in Peru, she was supposed to do all this.
And how often did she get these clues?
Like every week.
Okay.
Kind of fun. So they're like video, maybe a song that I had played, and there was a clue in the song somehow, and then puzzles and lock boxes that she packed, very minimal, so that she could take it on the plane with her because she was gone for, I think, almost a month.
Okay.
And so, it might have been like 6 weeks. But anyway, so we talked through and we'd FaceTime in. So she'd update me on how the clues are going. And the whole culmination of it was she got one word out of all these puzzles. And she got some gifts, like a poster and pictures and things.
What was the word?
Regalo, which is Spanish for gift.
Okay.
And so I had planned all of that. And the central focus of it was the gift itself was her engagement ring. So then I show up on the airport. I drove.
Whoa.
Oh, too much.
Yeah. So you showed up at the airport. So
yeah.
What airport?
You're right. So she's flying back at this point, Peru to Chicago to Cincy.
And was there a point in your mind that there was a possibility she was going to fly into a different airport or something?
So at one point she did say she was in Chicago. She had landed. I had already prepped to meet her in Chicago without her knowledge. It was a surprise. She calls me while I'm in Chicago getting ready to head to the airport. I had a really close buddy of mine bring me to Chicago, and he was...
From here, from Dayton.
Yeah, Keith Holcomb.
Okay.
He was right. He Cedarville guy.
Yeah.
Loves Keith. He was kind of wingman in this whole situation. But he brought me to Chicago. We hung out in Chicago for the night, and then he brought me to the airport. It was right before we were about to go to the airport. She calls me and says, hey, there's an earlier flight to Cincinnati.
There you go.
And I'm not gonna lie, I was like, if you go on that flight, we're gonna have some issues because I was supposed to pick her up in Cincinnati. So I'd already bought my plane ticket to fly back home with her from Chicago. So it was a whole thing. And so I had to kind of, I wouldn't say lie. It was kind of like a deceitful, like, I can't get to you in time. There's no way I can get to Cincinnati in time to pick you up. So you're going to have to just take the later flight. She bought it, and which was really good because if she didn't buy that, I don't know what we would have done. But she waited. So then I did arrive at the airport. Southwest was great. They worked with me. And that's where all of the stories come from and the bigness of it.
So because you had bought a ticket to fly back, that's how you could get on the plane.
I got on the plane, and Southwest. So even as I'm buying a ticket, I'm working with the ticketing office and Southwest, like the hospitality group of Southwest Airlines. They were great. I was like, hey, I want to propose on this plane. So I did bring a lockbox, not illegal. I had to show them all of it because it was like a codex, kind of like from the Da Vinci Code kind of thing.
Okay.
I had the ring inside it. It was open to the word regalo. And then I had a stewardess bring it onto the plane while she's sitting in her seat. And as she's opening the box on the plane, I'm walking down the aisle into her row and bending down on a knee and proposing.
And you asked her?
And I asked her. She did say yes. So
She did not?
She did.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Well, I know she did because how long have you been married?
4.5 years.
4.5 years already.
2020. Yeah, we got married right in the middle of a fun pandemic.
COVID. Wow. So
yep.
How did you get any pushback from Southwest?
No, actually, they were so kind that they said, hey, there's a certain part of the airport that you are at to tuck yourself away in so she doesn't see you while she's getting off of her first flight and hanging out. And then we will call you once her ticket scans so that you can like go to the...
Get in line.
Yeah, get to the gate. So they were awesome. And then they followed up with all of their, they wanted to do some Instagram reels and... We got interviewed by something in New York. I mean, it was a whole thing. So.
Yeah. So how did the passengers respond?
Oh, yeah. It came over the intercom of the plane, and I can still hear the guy in the back of the video going, "She's getting married." It was a whole thing. But yeah, everybody celebrating. They gave us like a nice gift for flying. They actually gave us money towards a honeymoon as part of like their PR thing. So it was a really neat, just like memorable, kind of wild, something you don't ever think. And it all kind of started where I wanted to do like a little puzzle. I wanted to propose. How do those mesh? I asked Southwest, can this happen? And then it morphed into something way much more than.
And that all fits in really with your personality, right?
Probably, yeah. I'd have to say that is something I love to dream. I love to like vision. I love to think through, but I also like to be strategic in it all. So I feel like those things kind of play into that.
Well, now that you're married, and as a married couple now,
you
are raising 2 boys in the hope that they follow Jesus the rest of their life, all their life.
Absolutely.
So as a young dad that you are, how has your understanding of God's love for you become more crystal clear by seeing how you love your boys?
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people know how much like I love the church. Hopefully I love it. And I love discipleship. Again, hopefully like the Lord's grace in me has seen that to bring it into the context of a home and not just a ministry avenue, whether it's the church or a dorm setting or whatever. It plays out a little differently. This is more like it's life on life for sure. But you also realize how sinful you can be at times. It also makes you realize that there's nothing at all that Xavier or Theodore, Xavier and Theo is what I call them, but what either of those guys can do that would turn me off from them ever, And the Lord's grace in my life to help me be a faithful husband, to be a loving, faithful, hopefully servant-hearted dad. It's not perfect, but I do also realize there's a passage, I think it's Psalm 121. It says that the Lord doesn't fatigue. And as a young dad, fatigue is way more than I thought it would ever be. But just the fact that our requests are something that we bring up over and over and over, and we can do that, we can petition, we can constantly go to him. There's no fatigue. Like there's nothing that ever wears him out from us. I think it just kind of speaks, because I don't want that for my kids, but even my own emotions and energy can get taxed. So just to know that the Lord's sustaining mercies are new every morning, I think it just highlights that every time I'm around those 2 dudes for sure.
So you've touched on it, but let's go a little further. So how has being a husband to Emily and a father to Xavier and Theodore changed your perspective on life in general?
I think the I mean, in life, when you're a single dude, I mean, I got married when I was 28. So I had habits and practices in the home and things that I mean, my dad and mom were both like very organized people in the home. They like to be clean. Emily and I, even just in the habits in the home and things like that. Just having to mesh those, even just lifestyles at that point, that changes, and you need to be patient with one another and things like that. And I know I don't do things perfectly. And so having to learn how to blend those, same thing with now entering toddler stage, 2 to 3 year olds when they're having tantrums and things. But even more than that, I think what it's done for me is it's opened my eyes to see that there is a necessary approach of the Lord every day for grace to do this. I think a lot of times you kind of wake up single, young, think, yeah, I kind of control the outcome of the day. And I think more and more I'm realizing as a husband, as a dad, dependence is not something to like slouch on. I have to keep going back to the throne of grace to find that mercy and receive grace to help in time of need. Oftentimes I still fail at it, but I also realize Emily and Theo and Xav are just constant reminders of like, I want best for them, but I'm also not the source of what is best. So I have to keep returning to the source. Hopefully I'm doing that. So yeah.
Here you are. So you've earned multiple college degrees. You have 2 master's degrees from Cedarville. You have a Master of Ministry and a Master of Divinity.
Yep.
Cedarville. What compelled you to pursue these 2 graduate degrees?
Yeah.
What was going on in your heart and mind at that time when you wanted to really dig into the Bible and learn more?
Yeah. So I originally started my college career at Wright State University. A lot of people think I started at Cedarville. I was in Wright State. I was working at Chick-fil-A full-time. An engagement actually broke off at the time of my senior year.
I know that story too.
Yeah, it's a wild story. So that kind of ended pursuits of that vein. I was like doing social media, PR, that kind of thing.
How boring.
Well, still love it. Sports writing, that kind of thing, broadcast journalism. Still, that's kind of like that's
great stuff.
Yes, I love that stuff. But so I have that somewhat skill set, but after the engagement broke off, I kind of was just like floundering, like, Lord, what am I like kind of asking the Lord kind of selfishly, like, what was the next thing supposed to happen? Kind of had made my own plans. Obviously they did not come to pass. But at that time, I knew a pastor who was in the area who was actually starting up the Master of Ministry program. And I was bringing Chick-fil-A chicken to the event, which was funny because I wasn't actually interested in the event. He actually asked me, hey, why don't you stay after you found out about the news of the broken engagement? And so I actually stayed for that event, asked some questions. I never really wanted to do like full-time ministry at that point. I had no desire, but I did know some of the classes I had taken before kind of did not teach the Bible well. And I didn't know why, but I wanted to learn more about that. So I entered into my first class of the Master of Ministry. I tell people this story all the time because I think it just kind of speaks to the love of Scripture that has been developed because of these classes. I entered into Dr. McKinnon, Raina McKinnon's. As a class, we were going through a book of the Old Testament. And as a pastor's kid, you go into a class that's going to go about the Bible, and you're just like feeling so good about yourself. And I just finished my college degree, undergrad. I'm like, oh, I feel good. And he draws 3 boxes on the board. And he traces the themes of justice and righteousness through the book. And in that moment, I was like, I don't even know if I've ever read the Bible correctly. And that wasn't his point, but I just remember being like, I have so far to go. And to realize how rich the scriptures are about who the God is that they're revealing. And I was just like, this is something worthwhile. And so finished that Master of Ministry, did a year, then came to Cedarville to work, had an opportunity to do the MDiv as a part of my working here, and just loved every minute of every class. I mean, it was kind of, I just soaked in it. Some of the professors.
Who are some of those faculty members who really impacted your life?
Yeah, through class specifically. Well, I knew Dr. Trent Rogers from my time when he was a pastor at Grace, so he had kind of mentored me there. I also had known Dr. Chris Miller. So those guys were kind of apart from the MDiv, which is funny because Dr. Kimball, Dr. Spellman, Dr. Shepard, there's probably a ton of names that I'm leaving out and not trying to forget. But Dr. Bennett was another one. Dr. Lee, he actually did both MMin and MDiv for me.
Okay.
So those relationships just formed. Dr. Marsh was another one. Those guys just poured into me. And it was kind of cool because while I was in class as a student, I was also on staff at the university. So I kind of got a different perspective of, I'm not just like a 23-year-old trying to figure out I'm also working and discipling the students that are in amidst.
Right.
So I got to be in class with some of the guys that I'm like pouring into as RAs. So that kind of helped. It was kind of
did that lead to great conversations inside the dorm? Well, and
yeah.
Share some of that.
Yeah. So actually one of the guys, his name's Luke Britton. He's a youth pastor up in Troy. Me and him still meet regularly. He's now just a really close friend. He was in my dorm the whole 5 years I was in Lawlor. I was in Lawlor 6, but he was in Lawlor for 5, and we did classes together. So being able to talk about like what your union with Christ looks like, how would we want to like counsel people through that? What is the doctrines of the Trinity that we want to really pull out, enrich it, and then also to be able to encourage one another in our participation in the church. I mean, I don't know where else you can get that kind of like you're studying while at the same time you're living amongst each other. Obviously, I was leading the dorm and the RA group. And then we're also like building relationships with other people to do that. I mean, it was like multiplication of discipleship happening super fast.
When I think of that word picture, I think of you were actually working and living in a laboratory of the class, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That has to really bring the education even more to life.
Yes. That's spot on. I think one of the classes we did was Hebrews, and that was with Dr. Spellman. And even when I see him from time to time, we'll joke about that class of just like how rich it was and how many chapters we even got through by the end of the class. But I got to use all of that with discipleship in my RAs and getting to pour into them, and just saw the fruit just continue. And then they would go and use it. So
as a student, now as an RD, you learn valuable lessons, valuable experiences. How have you taken those experiences? And what have you taken from those experiences that you apply as a pastor at Patterson Park Church today?
Yeah, I think there's definitely things. I remember just being in meetings as an RD, you're watching a group of people trying to pour into people that some people are really like energized for the Lord. And then there are other people that could care less, that they're either at the university or just about their walk with the Lord at all. And then you go into a church and you're all gathered for a reason, but people have priorities and people have reasons to be other places in the church or than the church. And so you have to try to find a kind of a common ground, bring people in. I think that's one of the things that I am gifted at. I'm a good gatherer of people.
Okay.
I do enjoy hiring the development of teams, like kind of pouring into people and in discipleship, but also even just like leadership development. And so even at Patterson Park, one of the first things I wanted to do is like, okay, as students will develop and grow, I remember what it's like receiving high school students as an RD. So now how can I, as a youth pastor, student ministry pastor, develop students so that when I hand them off to a former me, that they're received and ready to keep rolling and keep pursuing the Lord with the same zest and excitement that I would hope that I would receive. So yeah, I think there's certain like just practical things that I learned was how to lead some meetings, how to encourage them, how to encourage with not just flaky, like, hey, you look nice today, but actually like Christ-centered, like enriching, like how has God been working in your life and how have I seen that? And so even building in like the concept of biblical friendship and things like that to people. I personally, one of the things I've struggled with the most just in my whole life, my tongue can be used as such a target, like an arrow. And I know that. And so I have to continue like, Lord, refine that. But at the same time, it also can be used when I do aim it the right way. And the Lord does that grace in my life. I can be one of the most encouraging people because people want to be around what we're doing. And so instilling that into a culture of a student ministry, not easy, but I think we're moving that direction. It's good. So
well, we know from Scripture, because it speaks to it frequently, how dangerous the tongue is. Oh, yeah. Who can tame the tongue? Yeah. And I think of Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupt communication proceed except for that which is for edification.
Yep.
So I struggle with the same thing. I can easily struggle with and say silly things that are harmful. Yeah. So it's a challenge. So in your role at Patterson Park, what are the greatest needs? I'm not looking for dirt, but what do you see are great needs that you hope to fulfill and to build upon? Because it's been a solid youth ministry for decades.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's your vision for the future?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I actually, when I first moved to Ohio, I was halfway through 8th grade. So I actually was a part of this student ministry for 4 years during my like time when I came to Ohio. And so to see where it's at, even from then, to see some of the same things and also certain structures changing, I wouldn't say that's primarily the first need. My goal, certain future goals, I guess, one of them is I would love for students to like rejoice a little bit. I want them to actually take joy, not just serve hard, but rejoice in what the Lord's doing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, especially even in just evangelical culture at large, busyness is always around. And I am prone to it. I've filled my schedule far too oftentimes, probably still do. And you can ask Emily, she would probably agree. But a lot of times we don't like reflect upon what the Lord is doing and how he has done, right? Because we want to get to the next thing. It's productivity.
That's the Western culture.
Yeah. And that's just what we are. Yeah.
Right.
We're all geared that way. And so even helping students try to recalibrate their minds of like, okay, the only way that I'm set up for faithfulness is because the Lord is faithful and he's always been faithful. And so helping them kind of reflect on that. I'm trying to insert scripture memorization, rehearsing of that, and then also building it into a culture that's welcoming and not just one that kind of has those cliques, those groups of kids that want to be a part of. So I think obviously scripture, prayer, and the church are the big three things that you always emphasize. But at Patterson, I can see a theme of wanting them to rejoice. And so actually coming in January, we're actually going to start a series in Philippians. I know of no better book to kick in, Rejoice in the Lord Always.
Yeah.
So again, I'll say rejoice.
Very well done.
Thanks.
So you are also now pursuing a doctoral degree in what, worship and theology?
Yep. Theology and worship. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And so how do you envision this degree and all your education for that matter advancing the kingdom? I mean, I know you will have your plans, but the Lord's going to ordain your steps. But what's your vision with all your education?
Yeah. So I had just an opportunity before me to apply to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest. Had several people even from here that were like encouraging me in that direction. Theology and worship, I would have been very impacted. John 4, actually probably like 2012, 2013, went to the Worship 424 conference that Cedarville hosts. And it was my first like, okay, maybe worship is more than just music kind of a concept. I've always enjoyed the music side of worship, but I've never been like the fully trained musician. Patterson Park has a lot of incredible musicians.
And led by a Cedarville alum, John Lawlor.
Yeah, led by someone that is highly trained and highly fluent in that whole world. I'm not that. And so I've always tried to like engage. I can do music. I can play music. Where does worship also lead? And how can the corporate gathering of the church? And so one of my desires even through this program is I want to kind of go back into how the early church talks about worship, how they think about liturgy, how they think about creeds. I want to bring that kind of into the corporate gathering. And I've been just super impacted as even, I'm 2 years into this program. I am having so much fun in it. And this is probably where Emily's like, yeah, you pack your schedule quite a bit. But even just getting to study things like Latin, never thought I'd be reading Latin. And now I'm getting ready to enter a seminar about readings in theology and worship. So studying like, liturgy, how worship has been transformed throughout history and things like that. And then to think about it in a way that isn't just based in music. So the Father is seeking worshipers, true worshipers. So having a biblical theology of that. And then how can the church, the time that we spend as a gathering, as a corporate body, how can that influence us to love the word, read the word, pray the word, sing the word?
I think that's a misconception in modern day churches that worship is music. Just music, and it's more than that. So given your giftedness that you believe how you're gifted, do you see yourself being a worship pastor, or do you prefer to be a teaching pastor?
Yeah.
Or something else?
Yeah. That's kind of one of the reasons I did this this degree, this new opportunity, the doctorate. I could see myself in a teaching discipleship role as a pastor over the corporate gathering, and then kind of letting those musicians do their thing while being pastored over the entire time that we're together. That includes the ordinances, that includes the preaching, and kind of being someone that is a part of that. I love the research and I love the writing. So I would love to be someone that kind of engages in that world. And I'm also someone that likes to be creative. So one of the reasons for a doctorate for me would be to be able to do some more of the publishing side of things and to be able to create. So I'm actually working on a project right now even that's kind of spoken word, oral ways of like presenting the scriptures. And I'd love to figure out if that can be kind of translated into different cultures and things like that. And so having kind of a study in liturgy, corporate worship, that kind of stuff would.
Does this also tap into your interest and your skills in PR and communication? Is that?
Oh yeah. It's got my writing in it. It's got kind of the poetic side of my brain and my creative side mixed with my writing skills and literary skills and with the biblical education all behind it too.
Yeah. So how will people see this project once it's completed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know yet.
Really?
It's kind of beginning stages. I have a couple of people that are in the know of it. I'm like slow to release because I really don't know how to go about it. So I'm working on that part of it. But I've even presented it to several people at Patterson within the dorm that I was in. So I've been working on it for a good 4 years-ish and have some pretty good weight behind it. But yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah.
And then to some degree, even just having a doctorate would allow me to be kind of someday in the future, being able to teach a little bit more and be a part of maybe leadership at a university.
You could probably teach here at Cedarville. And maybe.
I mean, I do know the people and love those people, but you never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for spending the last few minutes with us. And I want to speak directly to those watching and listening to this program who may be interested in, first of all, an undergraduate degree. I think you should look at Cedarville. Go to cedarville.edu and you can find all the programs that we offer. But also, if you're interested, like Nick, pursuing a master's degree in one of our biblical studies areas, I can think of no better place than Cedarville University. So again, I encourage you to visit cedarville.edu and see what programs are available that you might want to take advantage of. Nick, it's a pleasure spending time with you. It's been fun to watch you grow up. You're not the guy today as you were.
Praise God.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For both of us. Thanks for joining me this week on the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Cedarville Stories podcast, brought to you by Cedarville University. Be sure to come back next week when we'll share another Cedarville story for God's glory.